'Tis was a great Sunday where your boy moves to 4-2, but I'll be excited to go through and talk about everything that happened in the games and the fantasy football impacts from them. Starting off in London, where they were sipping tea, dressed as Mike Ditka. Don't know why it was going on. The Jacksonville Jaguars just laid a complete egg. Obviously, Lawrence looked bad. I mean, if you count the drops from his receivers, we'll get to that later. But the main storyline is Travis Etienne lost his job. Now, while yes, he had a hamstring injury, what I saw was, okay, you fumble the ball / have an incompletion, and all of a sudden you don't see the football field for the rest of the game when you're already on the thinnest ice imaginable. So now you would think, okay, well, the job's Tank Bigsby's. Bigsby fumbles on a kickoff. Now, am I going to sit here and go, oh, okay, yeah, go pick up Dearness Johnson? No. While Johnson plays pretty much all the snaps here in Jacksonville, the reality is, I don't know. It's a 3-man running back by committee and one of the worst offenses in the NFL. So I don't think you'd be super excited about any one of these running backs. Obviously, Etienne moves down the rankings. Bigsby moves up. And in the deepest of leagues, you can look at Dearness Johnson. Now, going over to the receivers here, we were worried about Evan Ingram coming in and taking away some target volume from Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas. And Evan Ingram actually does just that. Evan Ingram sees 10 targets, which limits Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas to 6 respectively. Obviously, Gabe Davis now being fully healthy. Gabe Davis has 8 targets as well. Am I all of a sudden moving Gabe Davis up to the wide receiver 1 here? Of course not. But I think this should probably silence the people screaming at me that I need to move Brian Thomas up and he's not a low-end wide receiver 2 and instead he's a top 10 receiver. No, the reality is if Evan Ingram is in, Ingram will take some targets. It's a low volume passing attack in a very bad offense that will spread the ball out a bit. So how I'm viewing this is Evan Ingram is for sure a top 10 tight end rest of season. If you look at Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas, Thomas is a low end wide receiver 2 that you're still starting weekly. Christian Kirk is a borderline flex play, and Gabe Davis is probably worth the roster spot. If you're playing in a deep format, you could consider him for the flex. Now, going over to the Chicago side, Caleb Williams is really turning the corner here. If you go through and if you look at what we've had from Caleb over the past few weeks, over the past 3 weeks, we are sitting with a total of 7 passing touchdowns to 1 interception. And also, this game, we actually got to see Caleb Williams go out there and run the ball a considerable amount. Caleb Williams gave you the 56 rushing yards. Now, of course, a lot of that was off a big play, but regardless, if you're looking at Caleb, he does slide into being that fringe start-worthy quarterback every single week based off his matchup, especially if he's going to run the ball a bit. DeAndre Swift is turning out to be just the guy here. I mean, with Swift, 21 opportunities this week. Last week, 23 opportunities. The week prior, 23 opportunities. The week before that, 17. The week before that, 19. Week 1, 11. DeAndre Swift is a true 3-down bell cow and an offense that is actually improving as the season goes on. So super excited here for Swift. I don't want to look at the snaps and compare him to Roschon or compare him to Khalil Herbert, really because this game was a blowout. But we can say Swift had the vast majority of the opportunities. Khalil Herbert, obviously not worth a roster spot. Roschon's just a premium handcuff back. And then going over to the receivers in Chicago, Keenan Allen has 2 touchdowns. Rome Odunze, DJ Moore kind of gets shafted. The reality is you're going to still start DJ Moore every single week going into the future. Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze are borderline flex play considerations. And Cole Kmet looks like a certified top 10 tight end rest of season. This is another game here where Kmet blows up. This is a game in which Keenan Allen actually had the usage as well. Now, of course, you only have 5 targets for Kmet, so don't want to overstate this. This is still a very crowded wide receiver room that will steal some targets, but Kmet definitely a must-start option every week. Now, going over to Houston, CJ Stroud still gets there with the 3 passing touchdowns, even without Nico Collins. Now, obviously, Stephon Diggs remains a must-start option, especially with no Nico Collins in this offense. Tank Dell actually sees the massive jump up. Now, all the snap data in these charts are coming from PFF, and you will see that Tank Dell actually sees a season-high percentage of snaps played in this Houston Texans offense. He sees a season-high 7 receptions, a season-high 9 targets, and a season-high 18 fantasy points. Tank Dell looks like he slides into being that low-end wide receiver 2 for you weekly with no Nico Collins. Obviously, we had Joe Mixon on the buy low video 2 weeks ago, and Mixon comes in. Mixon just absolutely crushes. Get the usage as the receiver, as well as, really getting the 13 carries right out the bat and the rushing touchdown. Now, Dameon Pierce does get involved, but honestly, as we get Joe Mixon healthier, I think you could actually see Mixon go back to what he had at the beginning of the season, where he was pretty much just seeing every single touch in this offense. Obviously, they're going up against the Pats, not a super competitive game. Now, going over to what we have with the Patriots offense, really exciting to see Drake May. Drake May's not viable in fantasy. You have the 3 passing touchdowns. You have the 38 rushing yards. He'll probably be that borderline low-end QB2 if you're playing in a super flex format, but in a regular redraft league is not. Now, I actually picked up Antonio Gibson with, I think, $14 fab and started him in the flock league this week, which not looking good with 2020 hindsight. With Gibson, you had 4 targets, but obviously super inefficient rusher here. That was the case in Washington. Horrible offense in New England. That shouldn't really change. But Antonio Gibson actually split this backfield 3 ways with JaMychal Hasty and Terrell Jennings. So Gibson, probably a running back that you can go ahead and drop if we get any positive news about Ramondre Stevenson coming back in. And then going over to what we have with the receivers here. While I understand that, yes, you're going to be in a spot where some people go to pick up Damari Douglas off the waiver wire. Some people go to pick up Kayshon Boutte. Can't believe he was out there making plays. The reality is this still projects out to be one of the lowest scoring offenses every single week, in which I probably would go through and I probably would look to kind of just avoid all these New England Patriots receivers if you can. Now, going over to the Washington game, I actually played Austin Eckler this week with no Brian Robinson. Eckler's been a safe option in fantasy if you play in a full PPR format. Hasn't been great, but every single week that he has played, he's had double-digit fantasy points. But obviously, we see here that you actually get some Jeremy McNichols, which was the expectation. But the main issue is you're just not getting the efficiency from Austin Eckler anymore as you add back with this time in Los Angeles. Now, the main storyline I want to focus in on in Washington is Terry McLaurin explodes. Terry McLaurin was the wide receiver 33 in points per game coming into week 6. And now he puts 23 points up on the board. And this is the 5th best game that we have had from Terry McLaurin since his rookie season in 2019. So great performance from McLaurin. You love to see the receiving touchdowns. I think this is somebody that has to move up from being that high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 in our rankings. Probably a lot closer to being a mid wide receiver 2 rest of season. And then looking at Jaden Daniels, obviously Daniels was a top 3 quarterback in fantasy before the game, is still a top 3 quarterback in fantasy. Despite only having 22 rushing yards, you actually get there with the 20 fantasy points. So nothing really changes on that front. Going over to the Baltimore Ravens side of things, Zay Flowers explodes immediately. You get the 9 receptions, 132 receiving yards, pretty much right as this game started. Now, obviously, you don't have the receiving touchdown. That actually goes in the direction of Mark Andrews, where I know some people may be saying, oh, okay, well, now we can start Andrews with confidence going into the future. For me personally, Andrews played 34 snaps in comparison to Isaiah Likely at 46. Mark Andrews ran 18 routes on 30 Lamar Jackson dropbacks. So I do not think Andrews is a must-start tight end by any stretch of the imagination at this point. But Andrews is definitely somebody that if he was dropped in your league, you could look to go ahead and pick him up if Cole Kmet's not on the waiver wire. Now going over to what we have with the running back in Derrick Henry. Obviously, the worst call that we had by far and away this year was Derrick Henry behind Josh Jacobs in our rankings. It's embarrassing. I need to bow down to the king. I need to say all hail Derrick Henry. This is a running back that comes through and gives you 132 rushing yards off of 24 carries and multiple rushing touchdowns as well. I believe we had him as the RB5 in our rankings in a full PPR league. And while, yeah, he doesn't really catch the ball, that hasn't changed. He had 0 receptions in this game. Simply, it just may not matter if Derrick Henry is this solid. Now, one thing I'm positive will be better than my Josh Jacobs over Derrick Henry call coming into the season will be Josh Allen to at least have 1 passing yard on Monday night. If you're bold enough to tail us on that, you can actually check out that free square on Underdog Fantasy for the Monday night game. You can find the link in the description as well as the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK to go over to Underdog Fantasy, not only are you going to be getting that free Josh Allen square more than less than half a total yard, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. And on top of that, you'll be getting a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single night. And what I would want to tail that with would be the Garrett Wilson higher than 59.5 receiving yards for that Monday night game. Now, moving over to our next offense, we're going to be looking at the Cleveland Browns, where nobody is reliable. You can't put a single player here in your lineup. Deshaun Watson is tanking the entire offense, 168 passing yards. Looking at what you have from the running backs, it's all garbage. I mean, Jerome Ford gets injured. Nick Chubb's coming in this next week. Throw it out the window. You don't want any running backs here in Cleveland not named Nick Chubb, and you may not even want Chubb with how bad this offense is. Obviously joking there, but still. Amari Cooper's had consistent target volume, where Amari Cooper targets this year 9, 8, 12, 8, 10, 6. But the underlying issue with this is if Deshaun Watson has a total of 0 games with 200 passing yards, where Deshaun Watson has 1 game with more than 15 fantasy points, it does not matter. You cannot trust Amari Cooper. So this is horrible. I hope one day we get to see Jameson here for the sake of Amari. But yeah, Amari is somebody that you really can't put in your lineup. Now, going over to our next team, we're going to be looking at the Philadelphia Eagles. The running backs here, nothing changes. Saquon Barkley still is an every down option, still sees 20 opportunities in what should be a good offense. Barkley is still the running back 1 in fantasy in a full PPR format. Henry is RB1 in a non-PPR league. A.J. Brown comes in, absolutely dominates. Devonta Smith comes in, scores the touchdown. Nothing changes. Jalen Hurts, elite quarterback. Barkley, elite running back. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, both solid options. Dallas Goedert does get injured here, but really there's no backup tight end that you'd be looking at. Now, going over to the Arizona Cardinals side of things, you actually have an injury to Marvin Harrison Jr., which will be something that you need to continue to monitor. It's a concussion, so it's not like we're expecting this to be an extended leave for Harrison. I mean, obviously, with the other rookie receiver, Malik Neighbors, it's been a little bit longer than expected, but still. Going over and looking at what you have with the running back usage, it's a game in which they really can't run the ball consistently. You do have a little bit of Trey Benson here, but what kind of saves the James Conner performance is Conner does have 4 receptions for 22 receiving yards, so it's not the ugliest thing in the world, but obviously it's just a bad offense in general with no Harrison. McBride remains an elite tight end. Going over to Green Bay, one of the big stories that you have is Jordan Love's probably going to lead the NFL in passing touchdowns per game, where Jordan Love over the past 3 weeks has 10 total passing touchdowns. They're slinging it. Every Green Bay receiver is a threat to pop off in fantasy. If you're in an underdog best ball draft, I mean, you love these guys. If you're in a regular fantasy football league, good freaking luck trying to predict who you actually want in your starting lineup here. Tucker Kraft actually sees fewer targets with the additional wide receivers coming in. This was the worry that we had with Kraft, why we put him behind Sam Laporta in our rankings this week. I will say we got so freaking lucky with that. We'll talk about Laporta later. But yeah, Kraft definitely doesn't look like a top 5 tight end here, as you have Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs back in. But Dontavian Wicks did get injured in this game, which will be something to monitor. Obviously, this is a very deep wide receiver room, however. Now, looking at the running back situation, Josh Jacobs has 18 carries. Jacobs has 3 receptions as well. So you have 21 opportunities in a very good offense. You're clearly starting Josh Jacobs every single week if you have him. Just it would probably be clownish if anybody here ranked him over Derrick Henry coming into the year. Now, going over to our next option, we're going to be looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. With the Bucs, they come through. They managed to drop 50 points. And Mike Evans in this environment scores 5.4. We just need to make it a hard rule. You cannot start Mike Evans against the New Orleans Saints. I mean, they're rules of life. What goes up must come down. An object in motion stays in motion. I'm sure that there are a couple other I don't know. But regardless, Mike Evans, disappointed against the New Orleans Saints, will be one of those. Chris Godwin, top 10 wide receiver this week, easily in your rankings, knowing Evans had the Lattimore matchup. Chris Godwin blows up with the 13 targets, multiple receiving touchdowns, 125 receiving yards. Godwin is sitting with an average of about 20 fantasy points per game so far this season as a top 3 receiver in fantasy. Now, I think it's very easy to know what to expect here with Tampa. We've been pointing it out all year. When you get a couple massive Godwin blowups and Evans disappoints, know that the pendulum's probably going to swing in the other direction. When Evans blows up and Godwin disappoints, know it's probably going to swing in the other direction. So maybe next week is the Mike Evans game. I don't know. I mean, you probably start both guys every week regardless. Super exciting options. Running back, looking at Bucky Irving. I thought Bucky was just an absolute no-brainer play. He kind of saves the day here with the rushing touchdown, but fundamentally, what's really surprising is seeing the usage of Sean Tucker, where Tucker gets 17 opportunities and multiple touchdowns as well. I think it's going to be so hard to project out Sean Tucker to be anything of relevance, though, knowing that Rachaad White may be back, and at the same time, the Bucs aren't scoring 50 points every week. Going over the New Orleans Saints, nothing really changes here in my mind. Obviously, we have the massive letdown game from Shaheed. Olave gets injured, so with Olave, he only played 2 snaps. Can't hold anything against Olave here. But Shaheed, super big letdown game, 57 snaps. It gets you the 1 reception for 11 receiving yards off of 7 targets, leads the team in targets. But reiterating what we said at the beginning of the week, with no Derek Carr, the only guy you can start in this offense is Alvin Kamara. Spencer Rattler's not that dude. It's not his fault, but yeah, you can't start Shaheed, can't start Olave, obviously, now with the concussion, and no tight ends here are interesting either. It's a tight end by committee. Going over the Indianapolis Colts, Trey Sermon gets the opportunity where Sermon actually sees 18 carries in this offense. What's surprising is Trey Sermon doesn't have anything as a receiver, but it looks like Tyler Goodson's used a little bit more in that role where Goodson has pretty much every snap on third down. Goodson's the running back with the 5 targets out of the backfield. But Sermon, super disappointing game. Probably you can go ahead and drop him, especially if we're a week closer to Jonathan Taylor coming back in. JT is the only running back you could trust in Indy. You get Josh Downs and Michael Pittman Jr. both getting there. Super exciting to see. I was with Joe Flacco under center. What's really funny is going into Sunday, when we thought it was going to be Anthony Richardson under center for the Colts, Josh Downs was higher lower 34.5 receiving yards on Underdog Fantasy. Then once the news came out that it was Joe Flacco, that line actually got bumped up to about, 49 receiving yards. But yeah, the difference between A-Rich and Flacco here is massive, and it sounds like A-Rich will probably be back next week. So, if you could sell high on Downs, I'd probably look to do it. Going over to the Tennessee side of things, we actually have the injury to Tajee Spears, really setting up Tony Pollard to be a true 3-down workhorse. Pollard to get the 93 rushing yards and the rushing touchdown. This is an offense with 146 rushing yards to 95 Will Levis passing yards. You cannot trust a single receiver here in Tennessee. If you had to go with somebody, you do have, say, DeAndre Hopkins leading the team in receiving, Calvin Ridley with the 8 targets for 0 receptions for 0 receiving yards. Really, the only guy you can trust in Tennessee will be Tony Pollard at this point. But Hopkins did see a season-high amount of snaps played. So I think if you have Hopkins, you don't cut him. What you're hoping to see him get traded elsewhere. Going over to the Chargers, J.K. Dobbins was buy low candidate for us this past week. Dobbins blows up 25 carries. Not only do you get the 25 carries, but you get a few targets out of the backfield as well, over 100 total yards, and you get the touchdown. Here you're up at 18 fantasy points in a tough matchup against the Denver Broncos. This is a healthier offensive line coming out of the bye. This is a healthier quarterback play coming out of the bye. And you had better matchups into the future. All why Dobbins is a buy low candidate. Looks like Dobbins must start running back every single week. Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston both get banged up in this game. Ladd does have 8 targets, however. So, Ladd definitely looks like he is the exciting name if you had to go with one. Especially if you consider that Ladd McConkey only played 49 of a potential 78 snaps, where he did get taken out of the game at some point to be evaluated for a concussion. Now, the Broncos side of things here, nothing is exciting at running back. At running back, you do have, I guess, Audric Estime seeing the field, but that's not even what blocks Javonte Williams. It's just a horrendous offense. Estime only played 2 snaps. Javonte, you get 6 targets, so it's not the end of the world. but you can only play Javonte in a game environment in which the Denver Broncos are favored. That's why you played him 2 weeks ago against the Raiders, but the vast majority of instances, this will be a player that you just go ahead and you bench. Courtland Sutton has the impressive receiving touchdown, but am I excited about Sutton? Probably not. You have 6 out of 32 Bo Nix pass attempts. Nobody is startable here in Denver at all. Now, going over to Pittsburgh, we were very high on Najee Harris in the rankings this week. Obviously, people are upset with us. A lot of that had to do with the combo of the great matchup against the Raiders, which is why you started Javonte 2 weeks ago. And also, we were expecting to have no Jaylen Warren. Once Warren was in, I actually got a lot more nervous about the Najee Harris workload. And yeah, the Najee opportunities actually come down where you only see 16 opportunities in comparison to over the, really entire season. Najee's been up at 20 opportunities a game. But Jaylen Warren does play a bit. Najee Harris is obviously the starter. George Pickens continues to trend down with his snaps played in this offense. And there continues to not be much passing volume with Justin Fields under center, which would be expectation. So yeah, here, I think you're still looking at Najee in plus matchups as somebody you can start. Fields definitely still looks to be one of the best streaming quarterbacks in fantasy football. If you picked him up off the waiver wire, you can consider starting him every single week in a 4-point passing touchdown format, or Fields is now looking at over the past month, averaging over 20 fantasy points per game. Now going over to the Raiders side of the ball, the only person who's interesting is Brock Bowers. Trey Tucker, want to reiterate, yeah, he'll play a lot. Trey Tucker's not any good. For the love of God, don't start Trey Tucker. Alexander Madison was the starting running back here yet again with no Zamir White. You kind of get lucky with the touchdown, but the offense is garbage. If Zamir White comes back in, this turns back into a running back by committee. You don't want a running back by committee in one of the worst offenses in the NFL. The only guy that's worth pointing out will be Brock Bowers, where this is now the third game that we have seen no Davante Adams. And in those 3 contests, you've had 25 total targets for Bowers, marking him as a top 3 tight end here at rest of season, which you already knew. Now, going over to the Detroit Lions, this is something I may just have to throw in the flag. Y'all keep on saying every single running back rankings video I put out, y'all go, why aren't David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs in the same tier? Why aren't Montgomery and Gibbs in the same tier? Y'all are probably right here. David Montgomery, just freaking crusher. He did get there for us on Underdog, where we wanted the higher than 70.5 total yards for this week. He gets there with 80. You get the multiple rushing touchdowns where the Lions just completely stomp the Dallas Cowboys. Jahmyr Gibbs kind of saves the day a bit with the receiving usage, where, you get the 6 points as a receiver, you get the 6 points as a rusher, so it's not horrible, even though Montgomery has both rushing touchdowns. Jamison Williams, like we've discussed time and time again, he's the low volume, big play field stretching option. That's a very valuable asset, specifically for the Detroit Lions. But your fantasy football team, it'll be hard to consistently rely upon him. And yeah, with Jamison, he gets there this week. You do only have 4 targets, but you get the receiving touchdown. Amon-Ra St. Brown only has 4 targets, but we kind of get saved with the receiving touchdown as well. But really weird game environment where obviously the Detroit Lions just simply don't have to throw the ball. You even get Hendon Hooker in here at the end of the game. And then going over to Dallas, RIP, things look like they are falling apart. You make Dak Prescott the highest paid player in the NFL. This is what you get. Key games against good teams. This is what happens. CeeDee Lamb still a must-start player every single week. You get the 14 targets off of 43 total pass attempts. Rico Dowdle saves the day with the receiving usage. Dowdle for sure looks like he is the guy. Obviously, Ezekiel Elliott has 8 carries, but Zeke is nothing as a receiver, and Ezekiel Elliott is super inefficient with these as well, with a total of 17 yards off the 8 carries. So really, Lamb's must-start player every week. Ferguson disappoints. I think Ferguson will be better in the future. Rico Dowdle saves the day as a receiver. I think Dowdle's still low-end RB2 based off matchup. Going over to the Atlanta Falcons, Bijan Robinson absolutely crushes. Thank you, Bijan, for not making me apologize for this. But anyway, I don't want to be super, super pumped about this, because if you were looking at the underlying usage, while Bijan Robinson has a great day with multiple rushing touchdowns, Tyler Algier came out and Algier played a decent amount. He played 29 snaps in comparison to Bijan Robinson at 39. Algier had 18 carries in comparison to Bijan Robinson with 15. It was a great matchup, which is why you had to have Bijan Robinson super high in your rankings against Carolina Panthers. But going into the future, it's definitely a concern seeing this usage with Algier. Drake London remains a tier 1 receiver going into the future. 10 targets off of only 29 total pass attempts. Absolute smash. Darnell Mooney was a sell-high candidate for us last week. I mean, Mooney comes down to earth, the 3 receptions, 38 receiving yards. So what you'd expect, right? When you don't have the passing volume for Kirk Cousins, where Cousins probably will be around 225, 250 passing yards per game going into the future, the Mooney blowups are going to be not as often. Obviously, if Cousins has 400, 500 passing yards in a game, Mooney's going to explode. And Kyle Pitts actually gets there as well. Kyle Pitts has 5 targets for 70 receiving yards, which makes him probably the tight end 1 in fantasy for the year. Now, going over to the Carolina Panthers, be honest, nothing really changes here. Deontay Johnson, 10 targets. He's a must-start player every single week. Chuba Hubbard, 3 down back. You get 18 carries. And at the same time, you get 6 targets. So you have 24 total opportunities. Must-start running back every single week until Jonathan Brooks comes back in. Then when it turns into a committee, at that point, we may need to reevaluate. Leggett scores a touchdown, helps my best ball underdog teams, but in reality, for your fantasy football team, it makes no difference. So nothing changes in Carolina. You don't want to start Dalton, but Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Johnson are must-start players every single week, and probably nothing will change here until you end up getting Jonathan Brooks back in, and then you will have to reevaluate Chuba Hubbard's status in your lineup. But of course, if you want to tell me on Underdog, what I'm looking at is higher than 59.5 receiving yards for Garrett Wilson. I'm 0 for 10 on my last pick, so you want to go lower. And also, we are going to be pairing that up with the Josh Allen higher than half a total yard. Pretty damn confident in that one. You'll get that over on Underdog Fantasy if you use promo code FLOCK, and you'll get a 50% deposit bonus as well with code FLOCK, and you'll get a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night. If you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy, the link's in the description and comment section. Just make sure that you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your Underdog Fantasy account, so I know who to credit with that free team review voucher. But much love. I really appreciate you, and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream before the game on Monday.